Hello again everybody, and we continue our theme of Jewish history and its interaction with the Greek and Roman world, with a bit of consideration of what happened in the revolt of Simon bar Kochba in the 130s AD and what might the long-term consequences of that have been. In the period between the first Jewish revolt of the 60s AD and the second Jewish revolt, there had been sporadic disaffection and problems between Jews and Romans. There had been some outbreaks of rioting in places like Cyrene, in places in Mesopotamia, and most of these have been met with a fairly unsympathetic response from the Romans. But there had been no major outbreak of revolt. However, in the early 130s, perhaps following a visit of Hadrian to Judea, a new policy was begun, and that was to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, but it wasn't going to be called Jerusalem anymore. It was going to be called Aelia Capitolina, and the name of Jerusalem was going to be rubbed out from history. There was a promise that the temple would be rebuilt, except that it wasn't going to be the Jewish temple. This was going to be a new temple built on Temple Mount, and that would be the temple to Jupiter, king of the gods. Well, those things were just about as problematical for the Jews as they could possibly have been. The governor at the time, one Rufus, was held by both the Jewish sources and by the Roman source, historian Dio Cassius, to have been partly responsible for the revolt because of his style of governing. A little more about sources later. So what happened in the course of this revolt? Well, when it became clear what Hadrian's policy was, Bar Kochba started to attack Roman forces throughout the province of Judea, particularly through central Judea. At no point did he ever actually capture Jerusalem, but he did capture an awful lot of territory. He set up perhaps 350 different hideouts or guerrilla bases and controlled an awful lot of land. He controlled it. We know that he controlled it because he got as far as taking on the title of Prince, Nasi, and also because he started issuing coinage, quite a lot of coinage, proclaiming that this was the first year of the liberation of Judea and this was going to be freedom for the Jews. He accumulated a very large army, both from within Judea but also from the Jewish diaspora, and a lot of Jews had returned to Judea at this point and joined his army. Perhaps so many that there had to be restrictions on who could actually join, but historians reckon maybe as many as 200,000 armed men were under his command. The Romans responded quite badly at first, quite weakly. Rufus disappears from history in 132 AD, so whatever he did was not very long lasting and no more is heard of him. The Romans summoned some help from legions from Egypt and from Syria and perhaps from further afield, but initially there was no significant victory. Now, this went on for really quite some time. The Romans pursued a policy of picking strategic points off one by one and then obliterating everybody who was anywhere near them. So it was what you might call a gradual process of annihilation. By 135 AD there came a large battle at a place called Betar, and this became a key event in the whole revolt. At the end of this, which went badly for the Jews, the Roman soldiers, particularly one legion, went on the rampage. There was an absolute bloodbath. According to Talmudic sources, there was so much killing that the blood was so deep that it reached up to the nostrils of the horses. There were tortures and atrocities, very grimly described, including things like skinning somebody alive. Perhaps at the end of this battle and the months shortly afterwards, as many as 500,000 Jews died, and in excess of that, more through disease and hunger victims. What did the Romans do next? Well, they decided there was not going to be Judea anymore. It was going to be incorporated properly within the province of Syria, and it became called Syria Palestina, thus the origin of the name Palestine. Now, some people say that this is the foundation of the Palestinian state, but actually the name Palestina had a much longer, a much older heritage than this, and it had been used for at least a couple of hundred years, perhaps longer, before this, not as a country or as a province, but just as an area. What happened to the Jews? Well, Jews were banned from being in Jerusalem, and many of them were just pushed further afield altogether. So there were hardly any Jews left in the main part of Judea. There were strongish communities in Galilee and on the fringes of Judea, but it really was a driving out of the Jews from their homeland in Judea. It was the end of a Jewish state, or anything like it, for a very long time indeed, and this is probably the most profound effect of the outcome of the revolt of Bar Kochba. What can we say about this? Well, first of all, there was no Jewish state until 1948, when a Jewish state was established under the United Nations, or League of Nations. The siege of Betar became, it was kind of idealised, but it became the name of a Zionist youth movement, taking its inspiration from that and looking back to a key incident, a key very sad incident at the outcome of this revolt. One of the generals under Bar Kochba, his name was used by David Ben-Gurion, one of the founding fathers of Israel, modern state of Israel, and so his Hebrew last name commemorates one of Bar Kochba's generals. So what are the lasting effects of all this? Well, the existence of a Jewish state was denied to the Jews until the 20th century. Other nations, in the meantime, laid claim to the same land, and this has led to a huge amount of problems, pretty much irreconcilable problems, which we still have today. The site of the temple has never been rebuilt. It remains a site of great sadness for the Jews. Other buildings have been built on there, which aren't the subject of my talk today, but the Temple Mount remains the Temple Mount without a temple. Atrocities on both sides, because Bar Kochba was by no means free of the charge of atrocities committed on killing Romans and Greeks, but the Romans certainly committed a huge number of atrocities against the Jews. That brought lasting desire for vengeance on both sides. Some of this is hard to know about because the sources are fragmentary and archaeology is partial, is increasing more bits and pieces all the time. We know quite a bit from coinage, some of which has been used as illustrations in this talk, and archaeology is revealing more bits all the time. Maybe the message from all this is that we should have more patience, more toleration of each other, and more awareness of historical truth. And the awareness of historical truth and difficulties should guide anyone who thinks that they have a monopoly on what they call truth.